The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Nick Zulovich, part of the team at Cherokee Media Group and senior editor of AutoFin Journal and Subprime Auto Finance News. In today's webinar, Bridge the Gap, how to sell cars like Amazon sells everything else. We're going to learn more from Matt Boyce and Isaac Hernandez of Podium. But before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items for today's webinar. Please make sure you dialed in using the phone number provided in your communication email, or you're able to listen via your PC speakers. We are recording today's webinar, and we'll make the recording available to you as soon as possible. You will be in listen-only mode for this webinar, but we will reserve some time after the presentation for a Q&A session. You can submit your question at any time through the questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel. And if we aren't able to get to your question today, don't worry, because we'll forward it on to the team at Podium so they can respond back to you directly via email. And lastly, if you have any difficulty during the webinar, please click on the hand icon to alert a member of our team. So with plenty of knowledge and recommendations to share, let's get right to Matt and Isaac for today's webinar. The floor is now yours, gentlemen.
Thank you. We're excited to be here. This is Matt. I'll start off the presentation by going through the agenda. So Podium, as a quick introduction, works with car dealerships across the country, both OEM dealers as well as smaller independent dealers. And from our research, we've been able to glean a lot of insights that we want to share with everyone here today. So we'll start by going through what the modern car shopping experience is and how that's changed over time. We also want to talk about how messaging plays into that and how customers have grown to expect that when working with the business, just like those convenient experiences they crave with a company like Amazon. And then essentially, your goal is obviously to sell more cars, and we want to show you how other dealers have begun doing that as well. And then we've aggregated a handful of tips across the millions and millions of messages that we see every day, and want to show you what works and how you can begin implementing these right away. So I'll look at things from a marketing perspective across all customers. And I'll have Isaac go through a couple slides as well, where Isaac specifically is an expert in the auto industry and again works with dealers of different shapes and sizes across the country. I'll have him go through that modern car shopping experience now.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to sharing, what we've been seeing here with Podium and what the modern car shopping experience looks like. I'm in one of those unique positions where honestly, like selling to the automotive industry has been a perfect fit for me because I'm a car guy through and through, and my wife isn't the biggest fan because I'm switching cars every couple years, and but it's all about honestly convenience, and that's like one of the things I found in my own car shopping experience, not only just working with automotive dealerships. So one of the things when it comes to the modern experience is convenience. Honestly, like that will set your dealership apart. As you can see, this glaring statistic of 23 minutes is what your average consumer will wait for a response. And this is specifically to, text messaging in general. We know there's a lot of live chat tools out there that require a little bit more bandwidth, require a little bit more, interactive response. But as far as texting and making your dealership convenient, you do have a 23-minute window, to go ahead and respond to those customers and give them, a genuine experience with someone at the dealership. And most car buying experiences today, we all know, most of them are starting online, right? Like 93% of your car shoppers start their search online, whether it's through, a car they saw on YouTube or an ad they saw on Facebook, wherever it might be. This is typically where they start, and they'll do, quite of extensive search and, research on the car they want. And, a lot of these searches are also done on your mobile device, which we know, as time continues to move forward, the mobile device, is something we need to take advantage of and embrace as a tool to help us, become more convenient as dealerships. And essentially, what we're finding is, like we said, a lot of the research is being done before a customer ever even steps foot into your dealership. They're looking at what vehicle they want, the vehicle reviews, watching YouTube videos on a specific vehicle, what kind of trims you have, what options are available, pricing. There's so many pricing tools out there, blogs talking about pricing, and what dealerships can and can't do. So a lot of this is already done prior to them even reaching out to your dealership, which is something, as dealerships, we have to be prepared for. We just have to assume that, the consumer today is already, they're already prepared, for a lot of what you're going to, try and throw at them. So just make sure that, you make it as easy and painless as possible, because that's what the modern consumer is looking for. It's just a convenient and painless experience with the dealership.
So let's think about how messaging can impact your customers. If you think about the way that customers interact with their friends, it's usually through a quick form of messaging. A lot of those are text messages. It might be Facebook messages back and forth. It might be commenting on an Instagram picture or methods like that. It's becoming less common to pick up the phone and call someone. And we're seeing that same trend apply now to businesses. And so before, I felt like I texted my friends and I called my businesses, but now I just want to text everybody. And so what we see is that 90% of customers prefer messaging over other forms of communication, and there's a handful of reasons for that. First of all, the likelihood that the message is delivered is significantly higher. So text messaging is available on phones and desktops. You can even text from a tablet. You can use messaging across different platforms, internationally, nationally, whatever is applicable here. So really 99% of text messages get opened, and the majority of those are opened within just a few minutes. And so they get the message, and they get the message very quickly. Secondly, it is really convenient on the go. And so they can respond on their own schedule. They don't need to worry about playing phone tag or going back and forth, even leaving a voicemail and they need to get back in touch that way. Just this morning, I had to call my bank, and I got placed on hold for maybe 15 minutes. And now that's not an exceptionally long amount of time. However, by being like a captive audience for 15 minutes, I couldn't do anything else. That was really irritating. On the flip side, if they had been messaging me back and forth, that conversation may have spanned an hour, but I wouldn't have felt captive through the entire thing. And if they would have taken 15 minutes between a single message, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal. And so by simply allowing someone to be a passive member of a conversation, you're really improving that experience quite a bit.
Yeah, and honestly, when we're talking about messaging, it really is just, better for your dealership. And, when we're talking in messaging in general, there's so many forms of messaging today, kind of as Matt referred to, but you just want to make sure, really, again, that convenience factor is what comes to play when it comes to messaging. You want to make sure you're accessible through multiple channels, whether it be through, just normal texting, web chat, Facebook Messenger. There's so many ways that a customer can reach you nowadays that you have to be competitive in these markets and make sure that, you're opening up those lines of communication. And, this is what we're seeing on our end essentially is, dealerships that, essentially have a text-based chat are seeing 11 times more inbound opportunities. And again, we're going to focus on text heavily because it is, just a more convenient way for a consumer to text with your dealership, and it adds that, that friendship messaging, situation that Matt talked about. It's something that, if I can't answer the phone, I'll just shoot my friends a text and just tell them, hey, what are the plans for tonight, right? If they're trying to call me and set those plans up. And a lot of times consumers want that same experience with their businesses, right? And dealerships in specific, right? They want to know that they're dealing with someone at the dealership, that they can answer their questions on their time. A lot of times our customers are at work and wanting questions answered, so they can't pick up the phone. So we have to be, ready to be able to text with them. And by opening up that line specifically, these are some of the results we're seeing. And essentially, this will always just lead to more car sales. Again, by opening up this line of communication, you're making yourself more convenient than maybe a dealership who just has a live chat option on their website. Something that I think all dealerships see is sometimes, people will come into the live chat and we call them window shoppers or fluff leads of people coming in wanting a fully loaded $80,000 truck and telling you they only want to pay $30,000 for it, and sometimes we want to respond that, hey, Santa isn't real. Unfortunately, we can't do that. So a lot of times by opening up text-based, this will let you know that your customers are serious about wanting to do business with you. They're not just going to give you their phone number if they're not serious about buying a car, right? So a lot of times that's why we're seeing a higher conversion rate with text-based sales. And
if we jump into qualifying those leads, now some arguments might be that essentially by putting all those messages on in a text or having all those customers all of a sudden make it that much easier to get in contact, you worry about it maybe blowing up your sales rep's time. But in reality, we're seeing more qualified leads through text messaging because you're able to establish their preferences, their budget, whether or not they're trying to finance, and even their timeline well before they step foot on that showroom floor. When maybe in a rush, you've got a handful of people waiting and you want to figure out who should I go to and help first and make sure that we get to them right away. Additionally, it helps get that conversation started. So you've probably felt this in your personal life as well, but people are weary to take that first step and engage with that sales rep. And then as well, visiting that dealership can be intimidating, whereas sending a text message just isn't. A few years ago, it wasn't uncommon for your common car buyer to visit 5 dealerships and essentially, like, very literally kick the tires on multiple cars and multiple dealers. Today, they're visiting 1, maybe 2. And so you want to start that conversation well before they actually come to the showroom. And if you just think about today's buyer, when are they doing a lot of their shopping? It's while they're maybe watching a show and they're browsing something on their phone, and it may even be late at night after you're closed. And so, again, they're not going to pick up the phone and call. They want some way to start that conversation, and they're perfectly fine if you pick it up again tomorrow morning. And so having a messaging tool allows you to do that.
Yeah, and what this will do as well is help you create better relationships, kind of as I referred to, in the past, like, a lot of times, with our friends, even our family, like a lot of us have those group texts, and it's just kind of become the norm. And this should be a practice that should be established in the dealerships. And when it comes to building a relationship through messaging, not only just being friendly, but also being able to answer customers' questions and letting them know that, hey, you're not all about the sale. You're willing to help them out and make sure you're going to put them in the best car for them, give them the best options, whether it's financing or trim package or whatever it might be. But a lot of times, if you're able to do that, via messaging before they ever step foot into the dealership, it'll give them that much more confidence to go with you instead of your competitor, because a lot of times, unfortunately, we've seen in the past that dealerships, where they'll ask them if they're ready to come in and buy, and they won't give them any information unless they want to come in. And that's definitely something we have to adjust to, because, again, other dealerships are doing this and building those relationships with those customers and letting them know that, they're different from competition. And essentially, what we'll see from that is happy customers, right? And obviously we all know when we have more happy customers, that means more referrals for us. And I think that's true across any business that you're doing with consumers. If you treat them right, they will want their friends and family to come visit you. And this is super important, in our industry specifically, because we are one of the heaviest, competitive industries out there. We're not only dealing with competition between the dealerships, but now private sellers, the Carvanas of the world. So we really have to, make sure we're providing that experience and making sure our happy customers are not only going to stay with us and stay loyal to our dealership, but also want their family and friends to come visit us as well.
It's nice to be able to make your customer's experience more convenient. It's incredible when you're able to make your dealership more efficient. And that's really what a messaging strategy allows you to do. We surveyed our thousands of users and found that on average, a dealership was saving 4 to 5 hours a week. Now, where does that time come from? Just imagine all the time that you've got your team on the phone trying to call back to somebody. They don't answer. You leave a voicemail. You get on the dialer. You make another call. And when messaging, you take all that time that's locked while you're actually trying to make that phone call, and you can be carrying on multiple conversations with the same person. It makes you significantly more efficient. Plus, all the time spent leaving voicemails is likely never returned. So it ends up saving your time or your team a lot of time. Additionally, they're able to manage multiple conversations at one time. So when you're on the phone, you're basically captive on a one-to-one relationship. But when you can message a lot of people at the same time, it allows you to be more responsive to that next inbound message that comes in, while still keeping your current conversation going.
Yeah, and by keeping that conversation going, essentially we're able to see entire conversation histories and make sure that by doing that, your team is always up to date, right? Because a lot of times someone will message in about service, and the service advisor will talk to them, and then essentially they'll find out that, hey, it's not worth fixing this car, let's look at new options. And a lot of times by having that conversation going, having your team up to date with messaging processes, you can easily hand those conversations over without skipping a beat, right? And now it's not, a lot of times, unfortunately, within the dealership, we practice to just call. That's kind of our main go-to. And a lot of times that one customer will receive 3 to 4 calls from different numbers at the dealership, and then they just start ignoring all the calls because it's just a little overwhelming. So if we can keep that one conversation going, we'll just make it more of a seamless experience for those potential customers and not lose momentum there. And essentially by doing this, we're going to be able to maximize on your best leads, which essentially, what we've seen especially in the automotive industry, that typically, your VDP leads and your leads from the website are essentially going to be the highest converting leads, opposed to your third party, right? We know there's a lot of third party systems out there. They stay pretty competitive. A lot of times they're sending, a lead they get to multiple dealerships. But if you make your dealership, specific on your website to being able to communicate the most convenient way, essentially you're going to win a lot more of those leads and close at a lot higher rate. And essentially that's what we've seen from multiple years of keeping track of this data.
Yeah, if you can get them to engage with you directly, you're twice as likely to get them to buy from you. That's fantastic. So messaging makes it really easy for your customers to get in touch. 95% of dealership website visitors won't convert because they're simply unable to find the information that they need. So what this looks like is your customer comes to your website and they see you sell these specific brands and you service these types of things, and they want to say, like, well, but do they service me, or like, could they help in my situation? My situation is unique because I've got a blank going on, or I had a bankruptcy a couple years ago, or I live a little bit further away than their typical customer, or something like that. And so a lot of the times they just have this one little question that doesn't quite get answered on the website, and you want them to engage in some way instead of just abandoning and moving on to the next site altogether. So messaging makes it easy for those really brief one-off questions to get addressed. Additionally, messaging helps you respond on your customer's preferred channel. Isaac hinted at this earlier. Rather than have your sales reps, as soon as a message comes in, pick up the phone and call them 2 or 3 times, when your customers are messaging you on, let's say, Facebook Messenger or through a text, continue to answer their questions where they're at and work towards getting them comfortable for a phone call. And so once you've solved 2 or 3 of their problems, answered a question or 2, then you can say, hey, I've got a couple other things that I'd like to explain over the phone. When do you have 5 minutes for a call? And so make sure you're keeping that conversation in that preferred channel until it's ready to transition.
And, by doing that, and earning their trust and proving to your customers that you are the most convenient dealership to do business with, you're the easiest to do business with and communicate with, essentially that's going to lead to repeat business. That's going to let customers know that, hey, this dealership, they're different, right, than all the other ones who are just trying to get me to come in and sign, right, or the only thing they really wanted to know was what I qualified for and try to get me in any car. So by separating yourself through, messaging in their channel, making it super convenient, we see our dealerships a lot of times win more of that repeat business because they are, the most convenient to do business with, essentially.
And what we've seen is customers will go in and add you to their contacts. You can even send them like your V card and just automatically have them add you to their contacts. And so next time, instead of pulling up Google to figure out who's the best dealer near me, they're just going to go into their text messages, look for your name, and pick up that conversation right where they left off. And that might be just service, but it also may be buying that second car in the household, or it may be replacing the car they bought with you a couple of years ago. So that repeat business for your dealership will be massive. Here's where we've aggregated our messaging tips specifically for your dealership, and these messages are blank, but all of these messages come from real experiences that we've seen happen on our platform. So first of all, at a high level, messaging helps you answer questions. So a lot of the times they want to know about vehicle availability. They may have looked at your website and it looks like you have something on the lot, but maybe it just hasn't been updated yet. And so they just want to ask. They just want to make sure before they step onto your lot if you have that black F-150 like you have listed on your website. So you can see how easily it is to go from that type of a question to go ahead and scheduling your test drive.
And that'll lead us to tip 2, which essentially, if you're doing those things, answering those questions and being helpful, in turn, that'll help your employees start to gauge on their answers and start to qualify leads a little further through the same messaging. They ask a question, you ask a question back, and that way, now your teams can essentially identify, whether or not this is going to be a good deal or this is going to turn into a real lead or a real customer. But it's a lot easier, a lot more convenient, and this is one of those places where your reps will save a lot of time that we discussed earlier, and they won't spin their wheels trying to call someone, playing phone tag, leaving voicemails, them calling them back. But simply by trying to qualify them through messaging, you'll save quite a bit of time.
You can see how conversations can be really enriched through conversations that include pictures and videos. So this works especially well in your service department, where you might want to send an update of additional parts that need to be replaced. But even on the new car side, you can see how this message has that image in line where there's no link out to a website. They can just quickly see it. They can find it that much more easily. And so it clearly shows as well. One of the big benefits here is that customer is working with somebody on site. And so I know as a buyer, I get frustrated when I engage on maybe somebody's website chat, and I'm clearly speaking with some agency that is not even remotely close to the business that I'm trying to work with. And so if somebody can send me a message of that car that I'm interested in, I know they're there. I know I'm going to see them when I get there, and I'm that much more likely to go with that person who I've been speaking with for the last hour.
And, pro tip number 4 for us will be, scheduling appointments and sending reminders. This is one of the easiest ways, again, to, essentially consolidate and make it more convenient for your teams to, schedule these appointments via text or, whatever messaging tool it might be, or even send a reminder the day of their appointment, whether it be for a test drive or a service appointment. That way, if someone isn't going to hold to their appointment, you can now schedule someone else, and again, streamline that process, make it a lot more easy for your dealership and run at a higher rate and win more business. And essentially what we see as well is a 60% higher hold rate when we're scheduling appointments and sending reminders via text.
You can also use messaging to follow up. So dealerships see a 3 times higher increase in response rates when using messaging versus a phone call. And you've seen this millions of times, thousands of times, where you call somebody up, it's an unknown phone number, they don't know who it is, you leave them a voicemail, they get back to it a couple hours later. At that point, they're busy, they just don't call, and next thing you know, that conversation just dies and dries up. Whereas the text message is at least going to get opened, and it's so easy to reply, they'll likely respond. And so that's why that works so much better.
And last tip we have for you is use messaging to gather feedback. Essentially, this will be an easy way for your dealership to hold employees accountable, to use as a training method, but essentially creating templates, within your systems to send to customers and figure out, what's working, what they liked about their experience with the dealership, what they didn't like. That way you guys know exactly, hey, next time a customer comes in, here's what we want to do, here's how we want to navigate. And this is something we recommend establishing in all departments, whether it's sales, service, parts, because again, a service customer could turn into a sales customer down the road. But essentially our goal for all your dealerships is to make sure that your customers stay loyal to you throughout all of their car needs. And so this will be one of the easiest ways to use messaging and make sure you're getting the feedback you need to improve your processes.
And timing is key on these feedback surveys, where we see a lot of businesses do this with email or mail. And let's say you send an email the next day, it takes them 2 days to get to it, and by then they've kind of forgotten some of the details, or they're on to their next problem. Now they've purchased a car and they're ready to go through a lot of other hoops that they've got to jump through. So in this case, the faster you can get that survey to them within hours or minutes, your likelihood to get those responses is significantly higher. With that, we've finished the bones of the presentation, and we really want to dig in and see how this can impact your business. We'd like to open it up for any questions.
Great presentation and information from Matt Boyce and Isaac Hernandez of Podium for today's webinar, Bridge the Gap, How to Sell Cars Like Amazon Sells Everything Else. And if you have questions for Isaac and Matt, please use the questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll get to as many as we can today. But and just as a reminder that we are recording today's session, so please keep watch of your inbox for a link to the recording so you can review the great information that's been passed along here, as well as distribute the recording to other people at your store to craft a strategy that might work for your particular operation. And gentlemen, to get our conversation started, you articulated how important messaging is, but the key, pun intended, to get things started is to get that customer's number and permission to text them. What's been the best ways that you've seen dealerships not only get the potential customer's number, but put permission to message them?
Yeah, and with that, again, it comes down to convenience and making it as easy as possible. So within the systems that your dealerships are using, just ensure that there's always, opt-ins or opt-outs that are obviously compliant within your state laws, but also, just simply asking for the name and the phone number and making it easy and non-invasive for the customer will go a long ways. And I think we'd be surprised that, by simply doing that, how much conversion we'll get, how many names and phone numbers we'll get, and make that experience a lot easier for the customer.
In many cases, we see those same customers reach out to you. And so by simply providing a way for them to engage, and then once they've engaged with you, you're totally fine to reply back as needed.
Again, the voices that you're hearing is the experts for today's webinar from Podium, Matt Boyce and Isaac Hernandez, for today's session titled Bridge the Gap, How to Sell Cars Like Amazon Sells Everything Else. And another question that's come in, gentlemen, from multiple participants is, it appears as if there might be a clash between some dealership personnel who embraces some of the technology you've described here versus kind of an older school approach, so to speak. What have been some recommendations that you have shared to convince some members of the store leadership to embrace messaging and how it can be productive and beneficial?
Yeah, when it comes to that, it really just comes to obviously knowing your market, knowing your area, but the reality is, all the data is out there that, we are moving to a digital age, a more, mobile device age, whether we want to embrace it or not. But I think one of the easiest ways to go about it is just simply by showing, how many channels are out there that a dealership can be reached out to. Just off the top of my head, there's your website, there's Google, there's Facebook, Instagram now. You can make your landline numbers textable. There's so many ways that a customer can reach you that you really are just putting yourself at a disadvantage by not simply embracing it. And of course, there will always be the traditional consumer who, ideally will call us, schedule a test drive, come in, test drive, and buy the car. But unfortunately, we're seeing that happen less and less in today's competitive market. So one of the easiest ways, again, is simply showing, hey, look how many channels are out there that customers can reach out to us that we're not on, that we're not embracing, right? And how many opportunities we're missing by not simply being on these platforms.
The one thing I do want to bring up as well, if odds are people in the dealership are already texting. And so this isn't something that is brand new. It's simply, let's make this a way where it's sustainable and secure for our business. And essentially by bringing everything into one shared inbox, now management is able to oversee what messages are being sent. They can eavesdrop in and make sure that their customers are being treated well. And then the flip side of that is, today, if your customer or if your sales rep leaves and they've had conversations with thousands of your customers on their personal device, they're going to take all that data with them wherever they go. And so that's a bigger liability to your business when really you should make sure that all of those are secure and safe in your own platform.
Again, the voices that you're hearing are experts from Podium, Matt Boyce and Isaac Hernandez. You touched on several questions that have been asked from participants here, and but another point to touch on, and you referenced it a bit during your presentation about how perhaps late at night or what have you, when someone's watching a ball game or whatever, they might go by a store website and start a conversation. How can dealerships handle responding to texts that come in at any time of day? What have been some best practices to when messages come in at either 10 in the morning or 10 at night?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question. Typically, people aren't limiting their shopping to just business hours. And you brought up a fantastic example. They're watching the game, they see your new model on TV and think, oh, I've just got to check that out. But it's 11 o'clock at night, and the dealership is closed. So again, if that's on somebody's mobile device, or you've got a shared cell phone that you're kind of passing around the office, that just gets really difficult to handle. On Podium's platform specifically, you can have your open hours, and if a message comes in outside of your open hours, they'll just get an automated response to say, we received your message, we will respond back when we open tomorrow. And that lets the customer know they've been heard, their message has been received. And in most cases, the customer isn't attempting to go for a test drive at midnight. They know you're closed, they just want to start that conversation. So it's not a bad experience on the customer, and it's a really good experience for the dealership.
Yeah, and one thing to add to that is, when using, specifically, your messaging platform, giving the customer the ability, which in Podium we do, to leave their name and phone number, which essentially is what a lot of tools are trying to accomplish, and essentially, just getting that lead info. If we can just get that right from the go, and then let them know, like Matt said, hey, we received your message, we'll be with you first thing in the morning when we open. You've now automatically collected the lead info, and you can respond to that customer as soon as you get in, because again, today, as far as we know, no dealerships are open till midnight, right? And so, they can't come by that car at midnight. So just leaving that option to have them submit their info will be huge for your dealership.
Again, our special guests for today's webinar are from Podium, Matt Boyce and Isaac Hernandez. For today's session, Bridge the Gap, how to sell cars like Amazon sells everything else. And just as a reminder, we are recording today's webinar, so please keep watch of your inbox for a message containing a link to that recording so you can review the great information that's been discussed here today and share it with other individuals at your store. And another question that's come in is it possible to retain and save some of these text message correspondence to have a future reference for a conversation? What's the capabilities there to be able to go back and continue a conversation that might have started days or weeks or even months earlier?
Yeah, with Podium specific, we do keep hold of all that conversation history with that specific phone number, so you can always see that. But we also integrate with your CRM tools, and this will be huge. You want to have a tool that ensures you can integrate with your CRM. That way, in the event that an employee leaves or employee goes on vacation, you have that conversation history within your CRM, or your tool has the capability to store that messaging. But essentially, you always want to make sure you're integrating with the CRM, right? Just that's home base for all customer information.
Very good, very good. Well, closing moments here with Matt Boyce and Isaac Hernandez of Podium for today's webinar, Bridge the Gap, how to sell cars like Amazon sells everything else. And perhaps a way to wrap up our webinar today, gentlemen, referenced a lot of ways that messaging can be helpful to be a conversation starter. Just what are some closing thoughts, maybe how to handle when an individual asks some very specific questions about how much is the bottom line price for a car, or what their trade might fetch, or some very number specific questions, or some other ones that might be challenging to answer. Just any closing thoughts and handling perhaps some difficult inquiries that come in via messaging?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is that your customers are engaging with you, and they're asking you questions instead of the dealership across the street. And so the way that I would address this is you've got you've got changes that are happening in the marketplace, and I don't know what buying or selling a car looks like in 5 or 10 years. We just know that the dealership that becomes that business the fastest will win. And so if you're able to stay ahead of the curve and implement new technologies and embrace the change in the marketplace, that you're that much more likely to be the dealership that wins in the future. And so messaging isn't a fad, and your customers are craving it, and they want to be able to ask you questions and engage in that way. And so let's turn it on and let them engage and let your business grow.
Perfect way to leave it. Gentlemen, that's Matt Boyce and Isaac Hernandez of Podium for today's webinar. Bridge the gap, how to sell cars like Amazon sells everything else. Matt, Isaac, thank you so much for the presentation.
Yeah, appreciate it. Till next time.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
And for all of us at Cherokee Media Group, I'm Nick Zulovich. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you again next time.